Hello and welcome to ELT Under the Covers Crumbs on the Sheets, where we take a broader look at the education, learning and teaching industry community, and we go a little bit more in depth into topics that are on our minds and have been suggested by you, our viewers. But first, introductions. I'm Neil of Team Teacher.
Hello everybody, it's Professor Reach.
Back for another edition of Crumbs on the Sheets, where today I believe we are looking at Lernen durch Lehren, or Learn by Teaching, which is something that you've dabbled in recently and something that we've talked about extensively, not just with ourselves, between ourselves, but also with its creator, Jean-Paul Martin. Brilliant man. What can you offer us today?
Well, I think first of all, what I would say is it's sort of a policy of mine to occasionally try new approaches for a number of reasons. One, because it's always interesting to try new things and see how it goes. And two, because it gets boring if you don't. And you need to keep yourself interested. You need to keep things sort of dynamic in the classroom. So, and you have to occasionally jump outside your comfort zone, which perhaps gets kind of, it's really difficult when you first start to jump outside your comfort zone. And then you kind of get into your experimental phase and you do your teaching diploma and everything. And then, you're sort of trying all these different things and whatever. And then you get kind of stuck in your ways and you think you're some sort of expert teacher. And then, you don't want to do that anymore. You don't want to try new things because, you think you've kind of nailed it all down. And nobody wants to look like a beginner when they've been doing something for like 15 years. And I thought about it the other day. You know how they say that thing that it's 10,000 hours to mastery. Yeah. And I had to think about that. And I realized that I've probably taught like something in the region of 15,000 hours of classes. So way beyond that, actually. And then obviously to do something you've never done before, that it's going to be a bit wobbly, so that's a bit funny as well. But anyway, I think it's good to do it for a number of reasons. So yeah, I decided to try LDL, which I've never really done before, actually. Beyond sort of, no, I've never sort of done it before. Maybe I've done it a little bit in terms of like, I guess jigsaw text is probably the closest thing to doing it.
Okay.
Just getting students to read a text and explain it to another group. But this was a lot more sort of right. The way I did it was, in this particular class, we've been doing a phrase of the day every day.
Okay.
So at the end of every class, there's 4 classes a week. We have a vote on phrase of the day, which has yielded some surprising results, actually. And I find that interesting. I think there's only about
Do you do that as a warmer or?
No, it's end of the class.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's based on the emergent language and the target language, which has come up in the class. Mm-hmm. And at the very end of the class, we have a bit of a vote to say sort of, which one is the phrase of the day. And the phrase of the day goes up on the wall. And this is a kind of ever-changing wall display where you have the phrase of the day, it's on the wall, and then, it gets replaced by the next one, by the next one. And there's about 7 that are actually on the wall. And the oldest one on the wall goes into like an archive. Oh. So there's quite a bit of there's quite a bit of micromanagement going on there, actually, but it only takes a minute or two, and I just do it at the start of class when they're chatting about whatever questions I've got up on the board or whatever, so it's no big deal. But it has been interesting to see the kind of things that they vote for. So I'll tell you some of these. The first one was a spoonful of something. Yeah. And obviously when I list it, I have the expression and then I have a definition, the origin, context, and examples. So the example is obviously a spoonful of sugar. Take 1 spoonful of medicine per day. For some reason, they were just really interested in this idea of spoonful, particularly as a noun, just a single word. Then after that, we got employee turnover. And then we had sit as a verb, but not for sit down, but for be situated. Like the library sits at the corner of the street and our house sits next to a beautiful lake.
I thought you were going to you say something like you sit with a problem or something like that.
Yeah, equally could be that. But anyway, just kind of a weird use of sit. Keep pace with, argue one's point. I think argue one's point was the first time that I agreed with their vote. So I found that was quite interesting as well. This idea of them voting for it, and whatever the students vote for was what was phrase of the day. Okay. Anyway, so we got this huge collection, phrase of the day. There's about 30 of them. And I wanted to do something in terms of reflection over these phrases, over the past 3 months, because we got all these phrases of the day, and I know that they're looking at them and we've done some work with them and stuff, but how about something to kind of bring it all together and to reflect on the class and stuff. So I thought that LDL would be an interesting way of doing that. Of basically, because the idea of LDL normally is that you give them course books, don't you? You give the students course books. Mm-hmm. You just kind of let them rip on the course book, find something that they want to teach, and then teach it.
Yeah.
So what I did is I give them our phrases of the day and ask them to choose 1 or 2 phrases of the day and teach that in whatever way they wanted. And I gave them some guidance in terms of you probably want to have an introduction, some explanation, some practice, checking that people understand, and some activity maybe. Mm-hmm. Right. But beyond that, I didn't actually really give any guidance. I just kind of let them go with it. Okay. to see what would happen. And well, let's talk about it. First of all, there is definitely a sort of a panic moment for some of the students of not really knowing what to do. I mean, I could see that if I give them a group task normally, this is quite an expressive group. They'll start talking, they'll get on with it, they'll do stuff. Whereas just giving them that, there were a few of them that got on with it. And then there were some of them who were kind of on their phones, sort of desperately researching. And it seemed like they were kind of drilling quite deep into just trying to understand the phrase, which I guess there is some interest in that. But I think more than anything, it was an expression of kind of nervousness of having to do something quite new. Mm-hmm. I try to have new activities in the class a lot. I don't think people should get stuck in their ways. But I think, the idea of having to teach, I guess, is a step up. So I provided a little bit more guidance. I printed out a little lesson plan template that I had ready. And that gave a little bit more direction for some people, not all. There's only so much you can do. You can provide scaffolding and templates and whatnot, but also just the idea of having to teach is quite, it's a new experience. So obviously there's going to be some nervousness. Anyway, eventually people started to pull it together. It did take quite a long time. I would say probably about an hour and 15 minutes probably was like the full preparation time. Mm-hmm. And this is for like a 5-minute teaching segment was the idea. Joint teaching. So it's two pairs teaching.
Right. So they're not preparing like a full class. It's just an hour's worth of prep work for 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Teaching.
For 5 minutes.
Sounds about right, to be honest.
Well, maybe
obviously
when
it was unpaid.
Yeah. Wait, maybe when you start. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the idea. And then we had the break. We come back after the break and sort of jumped right into it. Now, there was a few things that struck me. I think the thing I'll just get straight to the thing that I found most interesting, which was the thing I found most interesting is seeing how the learners had moments, kind of epiphanies and moments of realization while they were teaching about how difficult it was
to teach.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I found that really interesting. I mean, I guess
Did they
maybe
comment to you on that, or is it something that you extrapolated from kind of like the body language or stuff that you overheard them talk about, the general vibes?
they didn't comment on it, but there were a lot of realizations I could see, and a lot of moments of, oh, should we do this or this, you know? So I'll talk about some of them, right? So like one of them was one person got up and started kind of very confidently writing this stuff on the board, not saying anything, just writing this stuff on the board, like here's the phrase and writing it. And about 5 minutes later, they were still writing stuff on the board, like copying from their sheet. And by this time, you know, you could almost see the sweat on their brow, and like the rest of the class kind of tapping their feet away to, you know. So there was a definite moment of realization there. And it was, you know, there was something about like, I'm going to just get up and I'm going to put it all on the board because that's the way to do it, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And a realization that, you know, board work's great and all, but you have to think about how long it's going to take to write it up there. Could you give the students a task while you're writing it up there? Yeah, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And actually, the board work was very good when it was up there. She had one spelling mistake, which, you know, from my perspective, and I told them this actually, because the way we did it is they would teach their section, and then the students would kind of clarify anything that needed clarifying with me, because some of the language points weren't getting fully clarified. And obviously, you know, since we're there to learn the language, I thought I'd, you know, kind of come in with that. I don't know if Jean-Paul Martin does that. He probably doesn't, but I can't remember what he said about that. But, you know, I felt that they really wanted to know. So I did clarify certain things. And then we did it like teaching feedback. So I gave them feedback on their teaching, which again, I'm not sure if that's something is that something they do in LDL? Like, do they do teaching feedback? Kind of feedback on the method?
What did he say when we?
We'll have to watch the interview.
We'd have, yeah. Well,
I
would just say
put it in the link.
Watch the interview that we did again, because he goes into more detail. But it's been a while since we've done that interview.
Yeah, it was a couple of years, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think he talked a lot about the process of learning and acquisition by teaching. And
yeah, it was less of a focus on
structure.
You know, like how is it being taught, or you know, like is that information being going through, and it was more holistic, just like,
yeah, it was.
Are they going through that process? And then it's almost like he was going, yeah, they'll get it, but it's more important that they do.
Yeah, right. That's right. He was very guru about it, wasn't he?
I think he also had students gave feedback.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the students gave the feedback, and he would chime in, but it was mostly him just going, "You guys just pushing it away from yourself."
That's it. Yeah, and in my head, when I planned it, that's how I'd planned it to go, and I actually designed some feedback templates for the students to complete, which they did. But when I invited feedback, everyone was too kind of guarded to give it. Feedback, cultivating a culture of peer feedback is something I think you have to build up. And perhaps I haven't done a lot of that this term with that class. So it was a bit of an ask. They did give some feedback, but I found that I had so many comments that I wanted to make. So
Do you ever
anyway,
do the what's it called? I don't know if this is the correct term. The sandwich. Do you know where you?
compliment sandwich.
Yeah, the compliment sandwich.
Um,
Or have you ever expressed that to them?
I've never systematized that. So yeah, if I feel like I'm being too harsh, then I might throw in a positive or something.
Yeah.
But I'm not very good at sort of making it formulaic in that way
Okay.
of having something like a compliment sandwich. So anyway, to get back to my point, I decided with that one, the what was it? This was the person who did the board work, and I can't remember the point I was going to now. It was something about personal experience and spelling mistake on the board.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I like I said, I want to tell you, I've been chewed out for that, badly chewed out. Like early on in my career, it was British Council.
Yeah.
British Council observation, which I failed. And one of the things was I got chewed out for writing becoming with 2 M's on the board. You know, as if it was like a really bad thing. Hang on, I'm just going to let my cat in because it's going nuts.
His cat is, one of the feline faculty that he does utilize within his.
If you shut the doors, they just go bananas about it. Anyway, so yeah, I spelt becoming with 2 M's, and I got chewed out for it. I've been teaching for 3 years, and I kind of worshipped the British Council at the time, so it was absolutely devastating. You know, it was as if I'd committed a cardinal sin. And I sort of said to them, realistically, it's not that big a deal. Making a spelling mistake on the board is not the be all and end all. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like there's way more important things that happen in the class than a letter being in the wrong place in one word on the board.
Yeah.
Like the idea that the board has to be pristinely perfect. That's not what we're dealing with here. We're not a newspaper, we're not a dictionary, and we're not a spell checker. At the end of the day, we're dealing with communication and communicative language teaching. We're dealing with gray areas, interpretation, context, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So I sort of said, obviously it's not good. Yeah, you want the language to be as let's say as correct as possible. But there's way more important things going on than a spelling mistake. And I said to them, if someone would try and chew me out for making a spelling mistake on the board these days, I wouldn't want to be them, because I would really argue my case and probably get a bit upset that they were so bothered about it. I mean, if it was just like, you made this spelling mistake. Oh yeah, that was bad. That's one thing. But if it's kind of you really shouldn't be writing on the board if you're, something that's incorrect. It's like, whoa. Did you see the rest of the class?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you see all the good stuff that happened?
Yeah.
Like, and you're gonna get all shirty about an extra M.
Is that because they're like thinking, oh well, all of this should have been in his planning, so everything that he puts on the board should be he knows what he's going to do because it's in his lesson plan, but he never takes into account when stuff becomes emergent, right?
Quite frankly, it's because the person giving me feedback wasn't a particularly good teacher and wasn't a particularly good teacher trainer. It's that simple. Okay. Whatever his justification was for it, I imagine it was something along the lines of your language knowledge should be so high that doesn't happen. So basically, you should be a master of English if you're teaching it, which is exactly the kind of nonsense that we're constantly fighting against, isn't it?
Yeah, I know that. I mean,
like,
the idea that you have to have, like the an absolute mastery of whatever subject it is that you are teaching before you can teach it. I think,
and just the general idea that expertise is first and teaching is second, all that sort of stuff, really.
Yeah, no. No.
No, it's important though. I mean,
I
you
mean,
need
it
to
is
know.
important, but it can be, there's levels, and it can be,
Yeah,
graded, and
you have that sort of spectrum, don't you? And at the one end of it, you've got the kind of stuffy university professors who are the biggest experts in the world but don't know how to teach. And then at the other end of it, you've got probably like personal development gurus and stuff who, the kind of fake it till you make it attitude, who are like really engaging and have all kinds of like little games and tasks and stuff that people do. But, actually they're just making it all up as they go along,
yeah,
sort of thing.
yeah, yeah,
So,
and
yeah. And
just
then,
state pumping and all that sort of stuff.
yeah,
Yeah, and
right.
you don't. It's the argument's like you don't need to have a degree in English to be teaching nursery
No.
school kids phonics.
Well, absolutely not.
Yeah.
No, you don't need a degree in English to teach anyone English. I mean, we don't. I don't have a degree in English. I don't know many people who do. And if you do, actually, if you do have a degree in English, you start to be a bit of a stickler about certain things. You start to get attached to concepts like fewer and less, and arguing about whether gunner should be acceptable spoken contraction or not. So there's sort of disadvantages to being so tied to the academia in that way.
Yeah. Well,
So anyway,
yeah. Sorry, carry on.
yeah, we'll get back to the point. The thing there was these moments, these sort of teaching moments. If you bear in mind, it was the first time that a lot of these students had ever tried to teach something. And yeah, there was a lot of reflection. There was actually quite a lot of realization as well. Like a lot of them realized instantly what was going wrong. Like, oh, I put too much on that worksheet, or oh, that person didn't understand. I should have somehow checked that, And actually found it really interesting to go through that process with them. I think it was enlightening for the students to see what it's like to teach, and it was enlightening for me, or it was very interesting for me to see how their mind kind of engaged with things by teaching. I guess the thing that I didn't, or I didn't quite have I don't have a lot of evidence for, is how it actually helped with the content, which obviously LDL is focused on the fact that by teaching the content, you learn the content.
Yeah.
Now, it'd be interesting to test that if the next class, all the teachers who taught their specific thing, see how well they remember the point that they taught. But more the thing that I found interesting was how they engage with teaching, which makes sense, I suppose, because we're very interested in teaching. In fact, we have a podcast where we talk about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was really fascinating, and because of that, I think it's something that I will do a lot more of. There were quite a range of different things that people did as well. And there was one person in particular who actually really surprised me with some interesting stuff. And, I asked her if she'd been a teacher, if she'd ever taught before. And she said no. She said she did. She tried to be a teacher's assistant at one point. It didn't work out. So I thought that was quite interesting. She did a thing where basically she was teaching, what was the vocabulary? Just let me think a minute. The vocabulary was steer clear of something, right? And she had a bunch of examples, like 7 or 8 examples. And for each of the examples, the students had to decide, was it avoiding someone, something, or doing something? So it was like, my cousins decided to steer clear of having a cigarette. Or, oh, you best steer clear of the manager today. She's in a bad mood. So it's quite a light level of engagement, but I really liked the fact that it was like this sort of tangential engagement. Like you're having to process the sentence, understand it, and decide something about it, but without it being kind of too much of too much just focused just on that word, just on that phrase of steer clear. So yeah, I really like that. And it was quite an interesting activity the students quite liked, even though it seems quite simple. And I wondered where it came from, and she didn't really have an answer for that. It was just something that came to her. But it worked. It worked quite well.
Is it just kind of like, when you're trying to ascribe something to that, but maybe it's just their level of creativity or the way that they approach things that it emerged that way. Because I wonder about those things, and that's what I wonder about. When we've talked previously about AI or coming up with new ideas, new concepts, how they kind of come about. Because sometimes it's just like you need that one specific person that's just got a different take. They just approach things a little bit differently, and something amazing comes from it.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, you do see activities like that.
Yeah.
And, I like to do stuff that myself, but I don't do it that much. And I like that way of engaging with target language, where the focus is not entirely on the target language. It's sort of on something else, but the target language is involved. Because I feel like that mirrors real life, because in real life, it's not like when I say something like the elephant in the room, it's not like I'm necessarily focused on the elephant in the room. I'm actually focused on something else. I'm focused on, having a discussion with someone or whatever. And the elephant in the room is just a useful expression of meaning at that time. So I kind of like this idea that you're focused on something else. So the idea that they were focused on determining whether someone wanted to avoid something, someone, or doing something, rather than being focused on the actual phrase.
That was the thing that they thought was the important point. It's very interesting. I've got a question for you.
All right.
You're talking about right? Observations, the teachers. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that some did really well, like the person that you're talking about, and then maybe some didn't do so well, maybe bad. Can you see what the difference was, or just kind of like any observations around that? Those that did, better. Those that you're like, what? They can't get out of the first gear.
Interesting. I think it's quite a complex point, although I think on the whole, it was a little bit down to luck. Because I think they all lacked experience.
Yeah.
So they were all kind of guessing a little bit. So there was one girl who kind of dove into ChatGPT. She knows that I use ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And she used the free one, the 3.5, to make a text. And of course, she ran up against all the problems that you have with GPT, especially if you're using 3.5 to produce materials. It was overly obtuse. It was wordy. She hadn't checked it. There was a load of words in there which were really fancy and she couldn't explain. People were like, what does manifold mean? And she's like, So, so that was interesting because actually her intention and her willingness to try something new was really good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's amazing to have a go and try and implement with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
But it horribly flopped. But then there's a big learning experience to be had from that, which is you can use ChatGPT, but you can't just go, oh, this is going to do it all for me. There's a lot of editing and curating you need to do with it. And I suppose there's a realization of that. And then there was the person who did all the excessive board work. Then there was someone who did like a written exercise, which was quite interesting. And I think the main realization they had was the importance of extremely clear instructions. Their instructions weren't bad, but basically everything that could go wrong with their instructions went wrong. And there was all sorts of confusing stuff in there. Like they had one sentence with a singular gap. where you had to complete it with a word. And after the gap in brackets, it said it's a 3-word collocation.
Mm-hmm.
And so people thought that meant you put 3 words in the gap. But what they actually meant was that the word in the gap made a 3-word collocation with the 2 words before it. Right.
Okay.
So little things like that coming up, which obviously you can learn from that and move on and, hone it. And a lot of this comes with experience.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know what to do? How do you know what's going to work? You just have to try it and reflect and refine and then move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that luck played a big part to it. So the one that went particularly well wasn't necessarily the one that the most preparation had gone into, although she had completely filled out that lesson plan sheet. I saw there was writing all over it. So actually she had done quite a lot of prep.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that did say, maybe there was something to be said for that. But I can't imagine, unless it was just intuition or she'd had some experience in some tangential way with teaching. Maybe when I said, have you been a teacher before? It was the wrong way of phrasing it.
Mm-hmm.
I should have said, like, where did you pull your experience from for that? That informed her what would work better.
Mm-hmm.
But I could see basically everyone's intention was good. It wasn't so much that some people were necessarily, it wasn't so much, for example, that the creative people were doing better than the people who weren't being so creative. Because, for example, the idea, like the writing on the board thing, that was, it's not particularly creative,
Mm-hmm.
but it actually could have worked. And there was a lot of positives about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like the fact you could see it all there was good. She had 2 versions of the phrase kind of put in a different way next to each other, and it made it very clear about the form. So it was be likely to,
Mm-hmm.
and it is likely that. So she had them together. So like, that would be like, I'm likely to win. It is likely that I'll win, like those 2 situations. So it was very clear and it was useful, and it's a low creativity sort of thing versus let's say the ChatGPT stuff or the asking about something, someone, or doing something for steer clear, which you could argue are a little bit more creative. But I don't think that necessarily weighed on their effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a lot of the tweaking was just experience more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other thing we could talk about is how people naturally came across. And I think there is something there. I mean, there's a point of someone finding their teacher persona, but then there's also how people sort of naturally come across when they come up there. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit tough to judge someone on that on their first class, because in my first class, I was absolutely rubbish. I'm completely certain of that. So, yeah, a little bit tough to judge people on that. But there were certain people who seemed to have a really kind of warm persona when they were up there, which kind of drew people in a little bit. There's two people specifically I can think of that when they were saying stuff, it was kind of like you just wanted to listen a little bit. And that's something that we've talked about, I think, before. We talked about it a bit when we were talking about lecturers and how some lecturers just seem to have that kind of, even though they're doing chalk and talk, they kind of have that they just have this kind of innate draw.
Yeah, that offers deeper engagement, a spoonful of sugar.
Yeah, and potentially we could link that to the interview we did with Mark Almond about putting the human in teacher. So I think Mark Almond's perspective there is that this sort of human element can to some extent be focused on and taught, in a kind of a drama style way. So I think that was his idea with it. I'm not sure if everything about it can be taught. I think some people
So
just
I'd say it's a
yeah.
definite soft skill. You could teach presenting. I think you can teach. I'm not sure if it's to be personable, but you could at least teach someone to be authentic. And I
But
think that's kind of
there's a horses for courses thing as well, isn't there? Though there's like, there's some people who are more kind of like, cross the T's, dot the I's, donk donk donk, and obviously their persona is going to be a bit different as a teaching persona. And then there's other people who focus more on the, I don't know, the kind of warm, whatever expression of communication side of things.
mhm.
And I think there's obviously room for teachers of all different personalities. I think that's for sure. It's just finding what works, and that you do that through experimentation, reflection, refinement, etc., etc. And so I find it really interesting to go through that process with the students.
It sounds very interesting, and I'd love to give it a go. I mean, the only thing that I can reflect on in my experience is, with being a parent and now interacting with my 4-year-old, in the often what you do, kind of like when they start to get to 2, 3, 4, and they start playing by themselves, they have this thing called unstructured play, and they kind of come up with their own kind of scenarios and stuff, and they start playing, and there's no guidance by you. But the reason I bring that up is that you can do a lot of stuff with that. So my kid is really into Hot Wheels and building tracks. So when he will ask me to play with him, and I'm entering his world, and I ask him to kind of teach me to build a track, and what are the right ways to build it, what does it, why does this need to be there, and
Oh,
watch him going through that process.
that sounds good.
It's an interesting thing, and also seeing him trying to teach his little brother things,
Oh,
it is
nice.
pretty interesting when you
Yeah,
ask him to do that, and you kind of see his process and see kind of like where his limitations are of like being empathetic and stuff. So I think there's a definite uh it definitely helps them, be it just given a different perspective,
yeah,
and I think it really helps with the skill development of like the skills that come with teaching,
yeah.
leadership, and speaking, and kind of organization, all that sort of stuff that we talked about.
Mm,
I would really, and I hope you do, follow up and try and come up with some way to assess the knowledge that they acquire, not the knowledge that's
yeah,
been taught to them, but if there's a difference between the
yeah.
person that taught the knowledge and the person
Right.
that learned the knowledge, and did they get a deeper understanding? Is that and because I think that's the key point. Otherwise, it's just kind of like another unique. It's another
Yeah,
activity.
yeah. So I think my inclination, I will definitely follow up,
Hmm.
but my inclination is that there will definitely be some affective depth there because it was a highly emotive experience,
Hmm.
particularly for those who were teaching.
Hmm.
I think another interesting angle on this is going to be if I make this kind of a regular thing,
Hmm.
like let's say once a month.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to do it too much,
Hmm.
or once every 2 weeks.
Hmm.
Then will it become sort of less interesting to them and
Hmm.
therefore have less of an effect? Because that's another element of it. Because as it stands, I'm sure that whether it's the target language or not that sticks in their head
Hmm.
is one question, but there will definitely be stuff that sticks in their head,
Yeah.
right? And it might just be the emergent language that they used at the time,
Hmm.
but there's going to be a lot of emotion attached to it because of that experience, because
Hmm.
of the experience of getting up and teaching the first time.
That I would definitely say that's that's there. My inclination, one of the things that I think you did really well is to use those phrases and utilize them. So they've already kind of got a base before they go a bit deeper. I think that was, a stroke of genius. But we all know that that's what you do anyway. My inclination would be, if I was
Genius.
to use this LDL on a more regular basis, that I would probably do it as when I do review. So, like if I'm getting to
Yeah,
certain, like before an exam is coming up or something,
that's it.
and I would make either a physical or mental note of who's what subject there are a particular student or group of students are strong in, what they're weak in.
Yeah,
See if I could group them together and give them
yeah,
the stuff that's weaker that on, and hopefully it would have all fall in a pattern where it's like everyone gets assigned by basically their kind of knowledge levels on different areas, and it all works out perfectly. Obviously it
yeah,
won't, but because then they kind of get that deeper immersion, but also
yeah.
they help to review it for others.
Yeah, I agree. I think review is a really good point for it. I think the thing I would like to improve next time is have more chance for individual reflection, because there was no explicit stage of individual reflection. So sort of a 5 minutes of write down all the things you did well, or the things you thought went well and the things you thought went wrong. It's a very CELTA style thing, isn't it? But
Yeah.
I think that was missing. And then I wonder if that then would help with the sort of peer feedback phase. If the teachers themselves were kind of initiating it, then maybe the other students would chime in a bit more with what they thought. And that would mean it would be less me kind of coaching them, which is what it kind of felt like. And actually I enjoyed that, which is even more dangerous. I was like, yeah, I'll tell you how to be good teachers.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Yeah.
that's kind of that's the one of the issues with LDL, learning by teaching, is you're not quite, there's a gray line of, what is the focus? Is it the focus is on the language acquisition, or is it on them acquiring teaching skills? Or do they move independently, or they conflated
Right.
between, or I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think you can argue for both those things, because for me, communicative language teaching is definitely not just about the language. And anyone who thinks it is doesn't understand
That's
what
true. It's very
language
true.
teaching is. There's some people who really think it is just about teaching people English. It's definitely not.
No, it's
I mean, there's
communication.
so many. Yeah, it's communication. There's loads of soft skills involved in that. And, in the area I'm in now, it's not even just soft skills. There's all kinds of emotional stuff, because you've got people who are traumatized, going through all kinds of difficult situations, had this massive culture shock, and there's all that kind of stuff going on as well, which obviously we're not deeply trained in those areas. So that can make things challenging to some extent. But knowing that for some students at least, we are the consistent thing in their life, and everything else is up in the air. So the community that they have is the college and the classes, and that's something as well.
Yeah.
And so little activities like this, which kind of bring people together, encourage collaboration, peer feedback, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I think there's like 1,000,001 rationales why it's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
So whether or not the focus is on the language or the soft skills or both or whatever, yeah, I think it's great. And I think it's definitely something I'm going to try again and refine. As I've said, when I was trying it, I had no idea what I was doing, flailing around, kind of, this is the way that I think I'll do it.
Literally just like a butterfly.
Actually, the sort of teaching feedback stage was something I hadn't even planned, but I just found myself inclined to do. And now that I reflect on it, I think, yeah, it would be great to put in a reflection stage for the students before that happens and things like that. So yeah, it's refinement, isn't it? It's for everyone. So yeah,
It's kind of like you learn by teaching people to learn by teaching. This is getting way too meta, Rich.
Is that Lernen durch Lehren? Learn by
in South Park
and by teaching,
where they do the Inception episode. It's like it's like a thought within a thought within a more within a tackle. Right. I can't remember how it goes. But before
we should pitch that. Okay, forget CELTA. Get rid of CELTA. Now the way we teach it is day one, everyone does LDL classes. Then it's learn teaching by learning by teaching.
I don't think my brain can really process that anymore.
Yeah.
But before Rich gives his final thoughts, out there, people that are watching, people that are listening, have you dabbled with LDL? I don't mean the cholesterol. I mean Lernen durch Lehren. I can't pronounce it very well. Learn by teaching. Let us know your thoughts on what we've discussed. What, if you've done it, what did you find? Put them all in your experiences. Put that in the below comments, or send us an email at eltunderthecovers@gmail.com. But Rich, take it home. What would you like to say in final summary?
I think we have to go to probably my primary point for all teachers of all levels, all teachers of all experience levels, whether you are a teacher who's been teaching for 2 years or whether you're a teacher who's been teaching for 30 years. And it certainly is important, I think, if you've been teaching for 30 years. And also whether you're an instructor, a lecturer, an edutainer, a tuber teacher, whatever you are, I think if you consider yourself to be a conscientious educator, I think you're duty bound to try new approaches. That doesn't mean that you have to stick with them, but it does mean that you have to give them a go to see what happens and reflect on them, and then maybe try them again as well. Because, I've mentioned before my kind of my experimentation with task-based learning before my diploma, which I didn't really understand it, didn't get it, never particularly liked cutting edge, which isn't particularly task-based learning anyway. And I always kind of thought it was a bit overload, a bit complicated. The students didn't get it, blah, blah, blah. I tried it twice and decided it was rubbish. And then in my diploma, really got into it and became like the massive TBL fanboy. Like, TBL is the best thing. And, even a purist about it. Like, you've got to do the pure form of task first and then listen to a native and then analyze and then task again or whatever. So, I think that just goes to show how important it is to experiment with methods. And it's definitely one of the things that's benefited my teaching the most, particularly with all kinds of weird and different stuff. And now I can tick off my start of experimentation with LDL. I want to do more of it, but that box has been ticked now. And I've got some on my teaching bucket list which I haven't ticked yet. So, maybe they're up next. One of those is Suggestopedia. Ooh. Because the way I integrate Suggestopedia in my class is the kind of safe partial integration, which is, playing the relaxing music at a low level in the background, try to encourage students to be relaxed, blah, 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 blah. But, I would love to do the kind of purer form of it. And I'd love to have a go of that one with the blocks as well. What's that one called again? The silent way. Yeah. And I'd love to try it. I think because another thing I think about this stuff, and maybe it's just the contrarian in me, And I certainly don't think everyone needs to do this. As I said before, everyone needs, as a conscientious educator, you need to try new approaches. But I don't think everyone needs to necessarily do the kind of pure forms of these things. I think you can pick and choose. You can cherry pick if you want. The way that someone talked about this with the kind of introduction of phonemics is like have a kind of a 5-minute phonemic section in each class. You don't need to do the Adrian Underhill like full 90 minutes covering the chart is a class. He said that's his first class for any level. Wow. He does a full 90 minutes throughout the whole chart. But I'm different. I want to do that. I want to do the pure form. So I want to do the silent way with the blocks and the kind of weird chart thing that they have, and, you know, try it out like that. Because I've found that by doing things in that way, you know, you get something, you can cherry pick afterwards, right?
Yeah.
Like I've refined my own version of TBL now.
Yeah.
But the only way I could do that is by fully diving in and doing the kind of, what do they call it now? They don't call it pure TBL, but there's a specific name for it, and it's almost used in a derogatory manner.
Yeah.
It's like, I think they call it strong TBL or something like that.
It sounds like you know that old phrase of learn the rules before you break them.
I think so, a little bit, especially when it's something weird. This is one of the things I've learned, especially when it's something a bit weird that your initial inclination is to go, what's that all about? You know, why bother with that part? No, do that part as well. Because before you can write it off, I think you really need to try it. You know, like you could kind of look at something like Suggestopedia and say, oh yeah, I like the idea of it being relaxing and have the couches and have the plants and everything, but Baroque music in the background, come on.
Why does it have to be Baroque music?
Yeah, let's have some 1980s Cure instead, you know. And no, try it with the rock music, and then you can mess about with it. But just try because there's something, I think there is something about that, about getting all the ingredients, you know, before you make your own chocolate cake, make the one in the book, and then mess about with it.
Yeah.
So yeah. So as I've said, there's moving forward, have your teaching bucket list to experiment with different ways of teaching and different methods, and do it any way you want. You don't have to do the kind of deep diving into the deep end version that I like to do. That's just my personality. But experimentation is, in my view, compulsory. Yeah.
Excellent. So get out there, get experimenting. See you later, folks. If you're looking for more information from myself, you can go to teamteacherchina.com. We've got a whole bunch of materials, PowerPoints that you can use instantly in the classroom. We've got a Team Teacher China YouTube channel where we have videos teaching you how to use those materials. Team Teacher English, where we put those materials into a video form for self-study. And Team Teacher Baby, where I take my experience as a teacher and put that into parenting.
And go to youtube.com/Professor Rich to see some English teaching. You can catch me weekly live streams on Oxford Online English YouTube channel. Oh, and also you can do a YouTube search for POG Space UK, and you would get my alpha version of my new gaming channel, which actually just have some trial content on there at the moment. You can email us here at eltunderthecovers@gmail.com if you have anything you'd like to contribute to the show.
Smash that like button, share and subscribe.
And watch 100% of the video and don't click off. Thank you.
Bye.